They came from letters, they came from emails, they came from voicemails and social media. Your questions, your comments, and our master of ceremonies, Nate Mink, is back on Syracuse Sports to present all of these thoughts. How are you, Nate?
Doing well, Brent. For those watching on YouTube, you'll see I have a headset on. I prefer air traffic controller sometimes rather than
hands-free
ceremonies. Yeah,
gotta be hands-free in this whole thing. It's very
that's
active.
Right. But I'm good, refreshed, rejuvenated. Took a mental health break, day off on Friday, celebrating.
Well deserved. Good for you.
Bye week. How did you celebrate your bye week?
I celebrated my bye week by putting away all the outside furniture. And I actually had a pretty lazy day on Saturday. I kind of didn't know what to do with myself. My wife and daughter were on a college visit, and I stayed home to watch the pets. And other than putting the furniture away, I was just kind of hanging around. Like I was a bachelor again. It was weird, but I enjoyed it.
So we had a lazy weekend in the Mink household as well. We were initially going to go to New York this weekend, but decided to bag the trip due to inclement, rainy, yucky weather down in the Big Apple. And so we're targeting going down there this coming weekend because of the Thursday night Syracuse football game. Our Saturday is going to be readily available again. So we have the audacity to take one of our rare home weekends in Syracuse and pick up our stuff and go to New York.
How about that?
Who would give up a home weekend in Syracuse to go to New York? Who would do that, Brent?
Prime fall time, and you're heading down to New York City.
Yeah.
God bless you. Now, it's weird because it's a Thursday night game this week, and then next week it's a Friday night. So we're actually going to have 3 free weekends in a way because basketball will be starting. I say free in air quotes. But that's how the schedule breaks out, Nate. And I know we got a lot of football questions to get to here, and it's going to be fascinating to see how this team handles the second half and the weird schedule. And have you experienced the Enter Sandman intro at Virginia Tech? Have you been a part of that?
Not for a Thursday night game. I was down there in 2021 when Schrader threw the pass to Alford to win the game in the final minute. They don't really, actually what I will remember about that trip for a long time is how the campus and the town of Blacksburg and the stadium and the way the parking and the tailgating is down in Blacksburg reminds me a lot of State College and sort of the game day atmosphere that I grew up going to at Pennsylvania State University back in the day. Stadium structure similar to even down in Tallahassee, a Rector set type of old architecture. Another thing that I'm it's amazing the things that you'll remember from just specific games. Frank Beamer was at the game, and I think the AD suite adjacent to the press box. So, I was kind of watching every now and then. I was peeking over to see how he was responding because you got to remember, this was Justin Fuentes last year. I think it ended up being his final season. He ended up getting let go by Virginia Tech. So there was a lot of sort of discontent and uproar about the state of the program down in Blacksburg at the time. And that also is what struck me is a little bit of maybe how quiet, I don't want to say totally empty the stadium was, because I don't know if it's ever truly empty down there, but just the vibe and the buzz around town. Even when we came into Blacksburg and flew into Roanoke the day before, the buzz maybe wasn't as palpable as certainly I wasn't a part of this 20 years ago when they were in the Big East. But I imagine there's a lot of Hokie fans in that town and in that region that maybe you're just adopted a little bit of a different game day routine towards the end of the Fuente era and just decided to either take a pass or you're just drive in for the game and not make it a weekend trip like some of these other destination, tentpole college
So you got
footballs.
the opposite of what a Thursday night Enter Sandman Lane Stadium at night experience would be, unfortunately, I guess.
I mean, they still played the song. It was still really, really cool. But again, I mean, Virginia Tech wasn't, really clicking and firing on all cylinders the way the I guess some down there believe that they are capable of being in this era. But nevertheless, it was for the ACC and sort of the makeup of the schools that are in that conference. It is one of the top college game day atmospheres in the league. So they have that going for them,
which is nice. All right, Nate. The letters, the emails. I actually literally got a letter this week from somebody, not for this mailbag, but a nice handwritten letter. They came from all points.
So we can keep the term mailbag because
yes.
I gotta admit,
yes. I literally got a letter in the mail. So we can
mailbag is a little antiquated these days, and I don't.
What should we call it? The inbox?
I think we got to call it like the Bagu or the Lululemon shoulder bag. That's what the kids are wearing.
I vote against that. We'll have to come up with something else. Unless they sponsor this podcast, then I'd be happy to call it whatever they would like. All right, what do you got, my friend?
So
we came from all points here.
We kicked off with football, and we're gonna start off with football and personnel driven questions. One guy's not even on the team anymore. Another guy is on the team, but he is inactive due to a foot injury. But there's some readers out there that wanted to take your temperature, Brent, on Deuce Chestnut and Oronde Gadsden. And we'll start with Chestnut. Obviously, transferred down to LSU this offseason. Played in the opener against Florida State. Had a pick. Had some got picked on a little bit by Keon Coleman in the second half of that game, and Florida State ended up running away. Since that time, he has seen very little playing time. He is currently not active. I think Brian Kelly used that term. He is inactive, still on scholarship. The school says he's still taking classes in Baton Rouge, but he is not, for all intents and purposes, with the team at this point. So
that's right.
That raises a lot of questions about what's going on with Deuce and what his future perhaps is in college football or at LSU in general. And so fans are wondering if Deuce, given his progress academically, and he is able to graduate with a degree and be able to hit the transfer wire a second time and retain eligibility and become immediately eligible, would Syracuse take Chestnut back? So I'm gonna put you in the GM chair. You are Babers. If Chestnut wants to come back and he is eligible to come back, would you take him back?
Of course, I would definitely take him back. Now, provided he checks all the boxes he needs to check in terms of eligibility and he can play immediately, I don't think it'd be worth it to take him back if he had to wait another year, right? So, provided he can walk on the field in 2024 for Syracuse football, yes, I would definitely take him back, because at the end of the day, you need talent. He is one of the more talented cornerbacks Syracuse has had in the last 15 years. He fit here. He stood out here. He found out the hard way that the grass is not always greener, quite literally, in a sense, if you're seeking NIL money in the SEC. As long as he's willing to be humble and embrace Syracuse and come back and be a part of the Ohana and the family, I would, in my role as general manager or as Dino Babers, 100%, I would take him back, because I think there's enough players on this team that would forgive him, for lack of a better term. I don't think players get quite as upset about the transfer and NIL stuff as people outside the four walls of the football facility do. And at the end of the day, if you're Syracuse and you got a guy like Deuce Chestnut that wants to play football for you, how do you say no to that? You can't. So I would 100% take him back.
I agree with a lot of what you said. I think there's a lot that we still don't know with Deuce. If you remember back over the summer when a lot of the LaQuint Allen news came out relative to his suspension, Deuce was named as being involved in that altercation in that off-campus party that turned a little ugly by the end of the night. And so, Deuce has not answered questions about that incident. We have very, very limited. We have essentially one side of what happened that night, which is really detailed in LaQuint's court filings from that incident, or from his lawsuit, excuse me. And so, I would say you would have to vet Chestnut and really make sure
that's fair.
What his role was in that night, and if you are comfortable And I think the way Dino runs his programs, I think he would pose that to, some of his captains or some of his team leaders about whether this is a guy that they would welcome back and would fit back into the program as well. So I think there's maybe a few more boxes that I think the university and the program would need to check, irrespective of what his on-field performance has been.
So I guess I could file that under provided he checks all the boxes, right?
Absolutely,
I would take him back. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's a great point to bring up. It's a fair point to bring up. If LeQuint, not everybody's in the same boat, I guess, but if LeQuint got cleared, my guess would be Deuce would as well. I wasn't there, I don't know, but yeah, check all the boxes that you can on the surface, and you can't turn down talent like that if you're Dino Babers.
Would you have any reservations about how he's performed for LSU on the field this year? Is he the same player he was when he was here?
Keon Coleman would rip up people in the SEC too. He did it. He proved it. It wasn't just Deuce that he ripped up in that game. It was primarily Deuce, but not just him. Coleman's a special talent, so I would have no reservations whatsoever because I do think, for the most part, he can hold his own in the ACC.
I'm with you on that. I think, just because, you could be an all ACC performer and struggle in the SEC or a more competitive or a bigger conference because the level of competition isn't the same. I mean, just look at the NFL draft picks by conference at the end of every draft. The SEC and the Big Ten, at least for the last 5 years or so, have routinely outdistanced the rest of the Power Five and the rest of the FBS. There are reasons players who are all MAC performers elect to level up and try to take their talents to a Power Five league, or a Group of Five all conference performer wants to bet on themselves and see how their skill sets translate to a Power Five league. It's because, they want to see how they measure up against the best of the best in the country. And I think Deuce, in some of his, his press clippings, alluded to the fact, playing in the SEC, playing for LSU, that week-to-week challenge in a championship type of environment, in a championship setting, appealed to him. And I would say, just because he was not as productive in the SEC West does not mean he would not be equally as productive in the ACC, going against the likes of Wake Forest, Boston College, Pittsburgh, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, in some respects, the creme de la creme in the ACC is Florida State. And to your point, Coleman got the best of him on that day. Well, Coleman's, a first-round wide receiver talent. So he's going to make a lot of cornerbacks, look a little foolish.
And one more point on that note, Nate, I would take him back just for the sheer fact I think he's going to be drafted. He really hurt his stock this year. But if he came back to Syracuse and balled out, I still think there's some NFL scouts that see him as an NFL prospect, and that's another player that I can brag about that came through Syracuse and went to the National Football League. Look at Garrett Williams this week. Got out there, not first play, but his first game after recovering from that ACL injury, gets an interception. Andre Sisco leads the National Football League in interceptions, right? Like, the more guys I can point to and say the path to the NFL came through Syracuse, the better.
Speaking of path from Syracuse to the NFL, it looks like, all intents and purposes, they have a surefire guy in Rondé Gadsden, who is maybe the next in line to go from Syracuse to the NFL. Gadsden obviously is not playing anymore this season. He had a Lisfranc injury in week 2 back in early September. That is a really, really nasty foot injury. I mean, you're talking about surgery and rehab that could take upwards of almost a year. So if he elects to return to Syracuse or continue his college football playing career in 2024, all intents and purposes, he will be out for the spring, and there's a good chance he will probably be limited, if not entirely held out, throughout August practice. So he's still got a long road to recovery. He's only about a month and a half into his recovery process. So Gadsden is a guy that as we get closer to the end of the season is going to have to make a decision on whether he wants to, put more tape out there at the college level, or roll with what he has put on film to this point and continue his rehab in an NFL type of setting rather than a collegiate setting. So I think it's Steve just wanted to handicap the chances of Gadsden choosing college over professional football. How do you handicap that? What do you set the odds on?
Well, that's a great question in the sense of this. If he just wants to get drafted, then go to the draft because he'll get picked. I've talked to a couple NFL draft gurus, Chris Trapasso included, who I really respect his work from CBS, and he said he'll get picked. If all things considered as it stands with the injury, everything. If he wants to be a high draft pick, then you have to come back because you have to prove that. Nate, you brought up the biggest point in all this. That is a nasty injury. It has ended some NFL careers, Deuce Staley notably, in the past few years. And if I'm going to use a draft pick at what is a position that there's a lot of wide receiver prospects that come out every year, what makes you stand out, right? What makes Arande stand out is he has kind of that combination of being a receiver and a tight end. And he's a versatile player in that sense. But I need to see it, right? So if I'm going to spend a first or a second round pick, I'm not taking a guy that had almost a little more than half of a productive season, got hurt in the first game this year, and has that injury, right? I need to see it. So Syracuse would certainly welcome him back. It's interesting that Dino did that interview with Andrea Adelson and David Hale a couple of weeks ago and basically spoke as if like, yeah, he's coming back. Our friend Chris Carlson asked him about that, and he kind of Dino kind of stepped out of that, just basically that's his expectation that he's going to come back. But put me up against the wall, make me answer the question. He should come back, and I think at this point he will come back. I'm leaning more towards I think he's going to play another year here based on a number of factors. But if he just wants to give it a go and pull Sean Tucker didn't even get drafted, but if you just want to get on a roster and prove yourself that way, then he'll get picked.
I'm going to put you up against the wall with a couple variables here.
Okay.
Does he return to Syracuse if Babers is no longer the coach in 2024?
I don't think so. I from everything I know about him and his dad, they really like Dino. And why would you? At that point, that would give you a clean break and a reason to move on. So I don't think so.
Would he come back if the quarterback room next year consists of the same core guys that are in the room this season? Or
I don't think so either.
Does Syracuse need to go out and get a quarterback?
They need to go get a quarterback no matter what, right? No matter what players are making decisions, no matter who the coach is, no matter what the scenario is. Like that quarterback room always needs to improve, and competition is always a good thing. But if it's as it stands, I don't think so, right? Because when you're making this decision, you have to think about your numbers. He'll be a primary target, but we would have seen that play out this year. He would have been double teamed a lot and been the primary focus of opposing defenses. There's a lot you got to factor in there. And if I don't have a QB1 I believe in that can get me the ball where it needs to go consistently, then, and I don't know if Carlos Del Rio Wilson is that guy, then it feels like more of the variables here are lining up towards Arande not being here in 2024.
And I think as last year showed, Gadsden again was a guy who says he turned down a pretty large sum of money to return to Syracuse and not put himself on the market, not entertain overtures from other programs who are targeting him as a transfer. It's going to be fascinating to see what his value would be on the market amidst a significant injury the way he has now. In other words, like will a team value him the same way, knowing that he's going to be unavailable for spring practice and again possibly unavailable for training camp? How is he going to acclimate into a new program if he's got to if he's got to be in the rehab in the recovery room. I
I'll
think
say this, though.
that's interesting to me.
When Arande's good, he's as good as it gets. He's as good as it gets in the ACC. I think he would have had a real opportunity to do some damage this year. It's clearly affected this offense. I mean, the connection that he and Schrader had, you could see it. And I think, a lot of things get thrown into the conversation here. That injury is just a big red flag. But when you look at the film of when Arande Gadsden's at his best, it's hard to resist. And you got 30 general managers out there. I think one of them would take a shot at him.
And maybe other college football programs again might, if he's not satisfied with the situation here in Syracuse. And
for sure.
And he feels he's not ready to take the plunge to the next level. He does have that transfer option available. So he's got a lot to consider, I think, over the next couple months, and it'll be fascinating to see where he ends up. As we mentioned, Gadsden was a guy who understands what NIL and payment options can be available to players in this day and age of college football. Again, he was a guy that says he turned down a large sum of money to remain at Syracuse. Brent, we've had a couple readers want to get your thoughts on sort of the landscape of NIL, and that's a broad general description for a topic that can obviously veer off in a number of different directions. But we have our friend John S. wanting to his credit, talks about being a little bit old school. He says, Brent, I've always felt that NIL has totally skewed the recruiting game, even more skewed than it has always been. I know it's old-fashioned, air quotes, to think that, but whatever happened to a free college education, to a quality school being the incentive for recruitment? I'm a proud SU grad, but really feel that money has ruined the college recruiting game, probably, parentheses, and sadly, irreparable damage has been done to the college game because of NIL. John, to his credit, puts forth an idea. Why not share NIL money with the non-stars on the team who really facilitate the success of the NIL stars? So he is an advocate for spreading the wealth around, and at the same time, he I guess maybe bemoans, if fair to say, he bemoans a little bit of the old way of college athletics. I don't know I don't know how to tee up on this other than just to say where the toothpaste is not going back in the tube. Fire away.
Okay, listen. I get longing for the past. I see a lot of things come up. I subscribe to way too many nostalgia feeds on Instagram, and I see commercials for old toys and the way it was back in 1987, and I long for those days. But the incentive of getting a scholarship to play college football we're talking about the Arande Gadsdens of the world, that's still an incentive for a lot of players that will never sniff professional football, and that is good enough for a lot of players out there. So that still exists. That's still a thing. But if we're talking about high-level, big-time players, the difference between, being a program contending for a conference championship or not, the schools have long taken advantage of those type of players. And, the chickens came home to roost, so to say. And I am all for it. NIL has not irreparably damaged college sports. It has made it better, in my opinion, because it has given those players the options and the choices they did not have before. The problem with NIL is how it's regulated. The problem with NIL was the NCAA, and not just them, but this was the primary reason, in my opinion. Just like turning on the fire hose 2 summers ago and basically going from fighting it, literally with, court decisions, this was not an NIL decision, but the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in a similar case about compensation for athletes and lost 9-0. And I remember Justice Kavanaugh basically saying to the NCAA, don't come back here because you will lose again. That's the problem, is they really blew it in putting any type of guardrails in place that wouldn't prevent all the problems we're in now, Nate, but I think would have somewhat eased the tensions there. right? I also look at the popularity of the game. Now, I'm smart enough to know that there is a writer's strike, and a lot of the ratings boosts that are happening in college football are due to the fact that there's more college football games on in places, in some places where otherwise they'd have scripted programming, and live sports is one of the last things that actually gets ratings in television. But college football has almost never been popular than it is now. And stars are what attract people to sports. I remember even growing up as a kid, and I didn't go to Syracuse basketball games because I liked the product as a whole. I liked Pearl Washington. I like Sherman Douglas. I like Derek Coleman. There's Derek Coleman right there, right? Eventually, you grow into a bigger fan of bigger things, but it's those stars that attract people to the game, and now those stars are getting compensated the way they need to. So that's my long-winded rant to say, maybe it wasn't better in the old days, John. Maybe those guys that I'm talking about should have got a little more for what they had other than a scholarship, and that's what they'd always hold over their head. Oh, you're getting a free education, right? Well, it's kind of evolved past that, if you ask me.
There's a New York Times did an article this week examining collectives across college sports, and it's the author of the lead reporter, one of the lead reporters on the story, is the same guy who dug into Trump's taxes when Trump was president. So this is a guy that knows how to find stuff and is. Anyway, he pulled out. He was able to pull out a few interesting numbers that I want to share here that I think sort of just speak to the moment and the reality of where we're at with paying players right now. Open Doors, which is a company that keeps track of NIL related transactions. They have data that shows that the average starter at a big time college football program takes in about $103,000 a year. Now, what qualifies as a big time program, I don't want to get hung up on semantics, but it's a figure. Cade McNamara, here maybe to drill down a little bit deeper, is a more precise example that can really paint the picture here. Cade McNamara, transfer quarterback from Michigan, goes to Iowa to be their starting quarterback. He's unfortunately suffered a season-ending injury, so McNamara is out for the year. He is doing the type of work on behalf of a collective that is, I would say, typical across the industry. Guys who have agreements with foundations or collectives will go perform some type of charity work or do some sort of social media post, and they will get compensated for that work. McNamara, according to the New York Times, McNamara made $600 an hour for his work.
Good for him.
That's pretty good. Pretty good
for him.
Texas Tech, their collective says they pay every football player on roster at least $25,000. Every football player, not just the stars, every player. Now there are
that's spreading the wealth.
The article goes into details about maybe some of the shaded side of NIL, gets into the disparity between paying male athletes versus paying female athletes. And that's a real thing. Collectives, they are not bound by Title IX law the way the universities are, which, critics might argue that is essentially why they keep an arm's length away from the universities to sort of work around some of these potential issues. But I think the point is that, paying players is just the reality of big time college athletics in 2023, 2024. And we're not going back to the old ways. And so, you have a choice as an institution, whether I think to embrace it or just bemoan sort of the state of affairs. And I find it in some respects interesting. And I know I'm dealing with a very, very small sample size here, Brent, but I'd be curious to know, like, how many fans of Texas Tech or Notre Dame or Miami or some of these other places that have embraced NIL to a certain degree, bemoan the old way of doing things versus
Yeah.
just like getting on board and being bold and aggressive in trying to recruit and retain, the best players on their team, and try to field and build the best roster they can to compete. So, a little NIL discussion actually I think dovetails pretty nicely with a tweet you got from Todd NY25,
Mm.
who asks, how has or will NIL shape the future of college sports, and are we headed to a day of reckoning for the concept of student athlete?
We're not heading for a day of reckoning. It's already happened. Like, we're living it now. The athletes are getting the compensation they have long deserved. It is an open market. It's not fair. It never was fair in the old way. It's either, envelopes in a back room, or it's all open. You brought up the disparity between maybe male and female athletes, but at least a female athlete now has the opportunity to put matters in her own hands, get on social media. And I forget her name off the top of my head, Nate, the gymnast at LSU, who just made a huge, she's in one of the commercials for the Manning cast, right? NIL afforded her the opportunity to do that. The Cavander twins at Miami, right? Some people don't like some of their methods, but they took a market, took advantage of it. And I guess influencer is the term, old man coming up with modern terms, but there's a pathway to do that now. So I think both Todd and John kind of, maybe they don't like the way it's going, and they're kind of hinting like it's going to bring down college sports as we know it. To me, that's a good thing, because college sports needed a shakeup. The system needed this infusion of trying to equalize the market, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I'm loving every second of it, because I think these athletes, the concept of college athletics waved by a long time ago. And I think maybe that's what people miss, is that feeling that it is college athletics and, everything that comes with that and the traditions of it. And I understand that, but it's not the fault of the athletes. It's the fault of the system failing for so long, the NCAA and others pushing against this for so long, and they lost. And now we're seeing the result of it, and I'm fine with it. So Todd paints Day of Reckoning as like a bad thing. I see it as a good thing. I see it as, the athletes strike back in a way, to go off a Star Wars movie title.
Yeah, I think the Day of Reckoning could be coming for the literal term or the literal concept of student athlete, with respect to, are you going to be designated something else, aka
an employee?
Employees,
yeah.
Yes. And I think we are certainly, the train is rolling down that track, and in some respects it explains why college athletic leaders spend so much time in Washington D.C. these days, trying to get certain legislative protections against,
that's what they're afraid of,
a collapsing business model.
That's what they're afraid of, which is why, to me, they should have embraced this. If they embraced this and didn't resist it for so long, becoming employees would have probably, I don't want to say never would have been on the table, but it wouldn't be quite as prevalent a conversation as it is now. I'm not as big of a fan of that, by the way. What I like about NIL is you're making money off your name, image, and likeness. It is marketing, it is branding, it is an individual thing while using the brand of the school that you go to, which, by the way, that's what college is for. You go to a major university to better yourself and prepare yourself for whatever steps you want to take into the real world. The employee thing, we could do a whole podcast on that. I'm not as big of a fan of that, but like I said, they made their bed, now they got to sleep in it.
So you had mentioned, you'd brought up Coleman, who you have behind you for those watching on YouTube. Coleman, McNamara, Anthony, Douglas, all these guys are very fascinating case studies in retrospect to I guess speculate or wonder what they could have earned in a name, image, and likeness era, what they could have gotten or commanded on an open market if they were eligible in 2023 as opposed to 1993 or so. And I think that's a fairly good way to transition into some men's basketball talk, Brent, because basketball season's right around the corner. As we record here on October 24th, we got a men's exhibition opener on Friday, October 27th. That will be a sneak peek of the Adrian Autry era, the first exhibition game for Autry and JJ Starling and Kyle Cuff and some of the new faces in the program. Unfortunately, Chance Westry, as we learned last week, suffered a lower body injury, is going to be out indefinitely. So he's going to be sidelined for a little bit of time. But nevertheless, hoops is in the air here in Central New York, and we're starting to get some questions about the prospects or the outlook for Syracuse basketball in Autry's first season. So we're going to sort of combine two reader questions here, Brent. One from Jacob and another from Mr. Ed315 on Twitter. Jacob is curious about the depth that this roster seemingly has under Autry and how Autry might utilize that depth. And he asked, do we see a deeper rotation from Autry than what we're used to seeing from Boeheim? So I'll tee up on that and let you go.
I'm going to answer that question, but I just thought of this, which combines this conversation with NIL. So I'm showing the camera, Nate. They came up with these Syracuse basketball trading cards. This is back in the late 1980s, okay? There's Billy Owens, right? My man Eric Rogers, okay? Stevie Thompson, right there. They didn't get paid a dime for this. There's sponsors on this thing. In 2023, they'd get a little money for this. So I just thought I'd add that to the discussion. I just remembered I had those on my shelf here, other than DC, who's over my shoulder. Okay, in terms of the rotation, well, Adrian Autry said he's going to at Media Day, right? He had all the right notes at his Media Day thing. It wasn't quite as bombastic as a Jim Boeheim, the Big Ten sucks kind of Media Day, but the two things that Autry said that were just music to Syracuse fans' ears: he's going to play man-to-man defense, and he is going to go deeper on the bench. And what I like about that is he looks at this team, it's best for this team that he does it, right? It's not best for this team to limit it to 6 or 7. This is a team that's versatile. This is a team that needs to find some three-point shooters at different points, right? So you have to go down the bench a little deeper to see who amongst those players on that bench, and Syracuse unfortunately lost Chance Westry for an indefinite amount of time, but who amongst those players that are going to come off the bench are the three-point shooters, right? You have Naheem McLeod in the middle, but he's inevitably going to get into foul trouble, right? So who amongst Monier Hema and those guys are going to mix in and change up things defensively? Is Naheem McLeod a guy that can play zone and man? Everybody focuses on JJ and Judah in the backcourt, and that's a great backcourt, but there's enough depth at guard. Nate, when I was at Media Day, I asked every player I talked to, and it was about 10 players, who was the most improved player on the team from the end of last season till the beginning of this season. Every single player mentioned Quadir Copeland. Every one of them as the guy that's just stood out in practice. So there's a bench guy that can really give you a pop coming into games. So I think it benefits Autry to put in a rotation, to go deeper, to mix things up, match up with the opponent, be like, what's our best lineup for this? Inevitably, you're going to settle in on some guys, but I believe him. I believe him when he said at Media Day, and I know things get said at Media Day. I've heard Jim Boeheim say that before, and it all falls apart after a couple of games. But I do think Autry sees it as a benefit to go deeper on his bench, too, in a world where we're in the transfer portal and you're constantly recruiting and trying to establish yourself as a coach and establish what your philosophy is going to be. If you can show you're playing 8-9 guys, that only benefits you. Not only this team, it benefits you as you're building a program in your image.
Copeland is definitely a guy that I have circled in the wake of Westry's injury as a guy who might see an elevated role now. Just given one less body, one less person that you have under consideration for some serious PT. I think the rotation, I'm sort of with you. I'm sort of I'm sort of, flashing that yellow caution light a little bit. I hear what Autry's plan is. I look up and down the roster and I think he's got, different body types that in some respects are very similar that dovetail into having a little bit more versatility. Everyone's not just locked in to a certain position. That being said, I think part of this whole conversation and what makes it fascinating is, Autry being a first-year coach, he's going to have to figure some of this stuff out for the first time. He's going to have to experiment or, get a feel for, what his best rotations are, who can do what in a game-like environment, not necessarily just a practice-like environment. And he's gonna be pulling, levers in some tense moments once the ball gets rolled out for the first time this year, that I think is, for lack of a better word, just going to be fascinating to see how he manages the game. And you can have a plan about saying you want to play X amount of guys, but in the heat of the battle, when it's the final 4 minutes, or the flow of the game is dictated by an opponent, or all these other sort of variables that can inevitably pop up in the course of a 40-minute game. What are you going to decide to do in that moment is so much more revealing and so much more telling than what you are going to say you are going to do in the middle of October. And so
that's fair.
That's part of what is going to make this fascinating, is because he, for the first time, has total jurisdiction over what that decision is. He's not just making a recommendation. He has to do that.
He has to
make a call, and that call is going to, have a certain outcome or a certain result that will be, scrutinized or praised.
This is something I should ask Adrian next time I get a chance to talk to him. I don't think anybody's asked him this, so don't steal my question out there. How many times has he sat there as an assistant coach and not necessarily disagreed with Boeheim? He certainly would offer his intel, and the Jim's Jim, and he's just going to do what he's going to do. But what's an example maybe of a rotation that just would have been different, or how many times he simulated that in his head? Like any assistant coach worth his salt, I think, is coaching the game themselves in a way, and I wonder what those differences are, or what his philosophy would be. And look at a guy like Leonard Hamilton at Florida State. He's known for playing a lot of guys, right, by and large. But like you said, Nate, when it comes down to it in those tense moments, he's not subbing guys just to sub guys. You play your best in that spot. That's why I always said, and I'll say it about Autry too, Jim Boeheim's starting lineup was always the most overrated thing, because he's going to put his 5 best guys on the court when it mattered. For all the criticism of Boeheim's rotation, the 5 best guys are on the court when it mattered, right? I think Autry will fall into that as well, but you still have a lot of games and a lot of things to establish and a lot of time where I think it will benefit you to go deep on the bench and see what you got.
Said another way, you're gonna do what you need to do to win the game, and it's
of course.
In some respects, it's really that simple. So Syracuse fans obviously hoping the Orange win a lot of games. How good is this team going to be this year, Brent?
The old prediction. Nate, I really want to say this team's going to make the NCAA tournament. I really do. Like, I'm so close to it. The thing that's stopping me is that schedule is just, it's brutal. Adrian Autry joked about that at Media Day when he was asked about the schedule. And he's like, oh, I didn't make this schedule. If I'm a first-year coach trying to ease my way into a job like this, even at a high-level ACC program, like, I'm not putting this non-conference schedule together. And some of it has evolved naturally, like Colgate. Colgate's the 3rd game of the year. Guess what? Colgate's beat you twice in a row, and they're like a legit year-in, year-out NCAA tournament program. And then the Maui Classic, of course. And, there's inevitably some non-conference games that are always tougher than you think. And you got LSU coming to the Dome, and we're going to go to South Dakota to play Oregon. And it's like, man, Paul Pasqualone used to say it, hottest fire makes the strongest steel. And we'll see if that's the case for Syracuse. And, Nate, given the importance of the non-conference schedule, I just feel like there's going to be too many blips on that for Syracuse to overcome. But I'll say this, they will be a bubble team. They will be in the conversation for the tournament. This is not going to be a year where, Joe Lenardi pops on the screen and you groan because Syracuse isn't even in the bracketology. They'll be there. Do I think they're going to make the tournament? I'm not going to go that far and put money on it. but they can. I'm not going to completely brush that aside. I think given the state of college basketball today and how you just have to quickly reset things, new coach and all, this team can make the tournament. Am I going to say they're going to? No.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with everything you said. I think another variable here is, the old adage, a rising tide lifts all boats. Syracuse can only benefit by the ACC scalping a few non-conference wins and, just flat out performing better out of conference than they have in previous years. Because at the end of the day, if the ACC is evaluated or measured as, I don't know, the fourth or fifth or sixth best conference, and there's a limited number of bids available in that league, that's really going to crank the pressure on you to perform exceptionally well in conference. And the days of going 500 in the ACC, at least in the last few years, that's not enough anymore. Whereas in previous years, maybe it allows you to sneak in and get one of those final bids.
So some good meaty basketball there, Nate. Before we do go, though, I have a couple of voicemails I wanted to play, and you can reach us by voicemail at 315-552-1964. We are going to go back to football for both of these, and it starts with a question from my guy, Dominic.
Hey, Brent, this is Dominic in North Carolina. What are the combined records of private Power 5 football schools in the time that Dino has been coached at Syracuse, besides Notre Dame, because they're a totally different animal and you can't put them in there? Because me personally, I think that is who Syracuse should be judged against.
Okay, that's Dominic. Did the research for you, buddy. I did include Notre Dame because they are a private school. But amongst your peers in the Dino Babers era, let's briefly go over the records. Okay. Syracuse 40-52 in that mark. So Nate, I'm going to give away something. We're going to do a trivia question here. You're going to try and guess who the worst program was. Should I not say the record so you can try and take a guess? So let's do this. Before I read the records, I just gave you Syracuse 40-52 in that time frame. Before I read the records here, they're the second worst, Nate, of the private programs in the Power 5. That's what I limited this to.
Yep.
Who's the worst?
Yeah, I'm going through each league. So
yep.
I believe they're the worst in the ACC. Now you say they're second worst, so
correct. They're second worst.
No one in the ACC that's going to be below them. Pac-12, you're really looking at, you're not really looking at many private schools, frankly. Stanford. But they had a little bit of a run. Give me the starting point again. Are we going back to 2016?
This is the Dino Babers era.
I got you. All right.
2016.
All right. Stanford had a couple years under Shaw. Northwestern's had a couple years under Fitz. The obvious choice is Vandy.
Ding ding ding.
I'm gonna go Vandy.
Great guess, and you are correct. Vanderbilt 29-62. That's the worst record. Syracuse is second worst at 40-52. Now these are not in order, but I'm just going to go through some more records that I looked up here. Duke is 43-50. Baylor's 49-46. Wake Forest is 57-38. Notre Dame 73-24. Stanford 44-45, so 500. Northwestern 43-47, BC 46-47, Miami's 57-37, USC 60-32. I did include SMU in this because they're going to be in the ACC next year. 54-38, TCU is 57-40, BYU is now a Power 5 team, 61-36. So Dominic, that answers your question. Judged just against your peers, private schools Power 5, second worst record. Let's go to our second voicemail here. Now, Brian goes back to our previous episode. David Hale and I from ESPN discussed, is it Syracuse or is it Dino Babers and the expectations of the program? Here's what he said about that.
Hey, Brent. It's Brian from Northern Virginia, Cuse alum and Cuse fan. Love what you've been doing on the podcast and want to comment specifically on the recent one with David Hale. Fantastic podcast. You're probably not going to like my comments, but David was right and you were wrong. You've been wrong. your expectations on Syracuse football has simply just missed the mark. In large part, Syracuse is going to be a 7-5 to 8-4 program because of the dynamics of college football, budget, NIL, and recruiting. And that's just the environment, and that's where Syracuse football sits. You can't compete and rip off 9, 10, 11, 12 wins when your athletics budget is $80 million compared to Florida State's $150 million. NIL, we just don't have the alums, the numbers, as a result, the dollars, to compete with the Ohio States and the Clemsons and the Florida States when it comes to collecting the dollars for NIL. We just don't have it. And finally, recruiting. The dynamics of recruiting have changed. We are not getting the powerhouses in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania like we were in the 80s and the 90s. Recruiting was regional then. You didn't have Alabama, USC, Florida, Georgia coming in to Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania back then. Now you do. That's changed. So you need to reset your expectations on Syracuse football. We are not a 9, 10, 11, 12 win program. Maybe once a decade. I agree with that comment on the podcast. But we are a 7-5 to 8-4 program. And I hate to say that, but it is what it is in the current college football environment. Anyway, love the podcast. Keep it up. Go Cuse.
Thank you, Brian, for your email, or pardon me, your voicemail, which you can reach us at 315-552-1964. Nate, we could do a whole podcast just on that voicemail, frankly, and the expectations for Syracuse football. Here's what I'm going to say in response to that. They're not even meeting that 7-win plateau you're talking about more often than not. If they get there this year, that's only the third winning season in 8 years under Dino Babers. So I'm not even talking about 9, 10, 11 wins. I'm talking about the standard you're talking about. They're not getting there consistently. They're not going to bowl games consistently. If they make one this year, that's the first time in a decade they've gone back-to-back years with a bowl game. So I don't think he's wrong, Nate, about realistic expectations in a sense of look at it broadly over a decade, what did you do? But you're in a big boy league. You are, according to your athletic director, an ascendant football brand, right? You have tools available to you now that you didn't in the past that you referenced there. And I'm not saying you've got to win the league 7 out of 10 years or even win 10 games 7 out of 10 years. But, Brian, they're not even meeting the expectation you're talking about, right? So I think some questions have to be asked about, is that just an institutional problem or is that a coaching problem, right? Because the institution's not going to change. If they see it as a problem, the coach is going to change.
I'm with you, Brent. I think this is a whole other podcast. I think Brian went off brought up a lot of great points, and we would be doing a disservice to just do this in a minute or two because it makes for such a richer, deeper, more nuanced conversation.
For sure.
That
more
frankly,
to come on that, Brian.
I'm not equipped to have on the spot, and my laptop, which is flashing with a low battery, probably is not equipped to have at this time either. But I think overall his general point is well taken, and I think again we can go in a lot of different directions with this. I think the idea that this is a 7-8 win program, I am not going to begrudge a fan for aspiring to be more than what you are. But there are institutional choices that have to be made and met for those expectations to become reality. And to this point, they were not made soon enough to be able to position this program to be that type of program in 2023. Whether or not they can't get there in the future, remains to be seen. But I wouldn't hold your breath on it happening in the next 2 years. while the facility that's being built remains, a pile of dirt on the ground. I mean, if that's not going to get ready until 2025, you're not going to be able to recruit to that until 2026 and 2027. So I hate to say like, oh, well, see you in 2028, but what you're seeing on the field in 2023 is a result of actions and decisions that were made in previous years. And I think I'll leave it at that for now. So
more to come on that. Great voicemails from both you gentlemen there. Nate, thank you for playing Master of Ceremonies today, being a part of our mailbag episode. Great questions from everybody. You can always keep them coming on X at Brent Axe Media via email, baxe@syracuse.com. And we mentioned the voicemail line at 315-552-1964. Nate, before your laptop runs dry here, any closing thoughts before we depart for this episode?
Great questions. Keep them coming to Brent, because I like popping in every now and again and help steer the ship, help steer the conversation.
Hey guys, thanks for hanging with us here on another episode of Syracuse Sports, presented by Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare provider for SU Athletics. Great questions from you guys in the mailbag. Love doing the mailbag episodes. We will certainly do them again, but you can get in touch with us anytime. It doesn't have to be a mailbag episode for you to be a part of it. On X or Twitter, if you prefer, Brent Axe Media. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Syracuse Orange Sports. You can email me, baxe@syracuse.com, and the voicemail line 315-552-1964. Just a reminder that Emily Leiker and I will be live after Syracuse takes on Virginia Tech. Look for it on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube as well. Please subscribe. Please follow on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or Amazon. Please leave us a review on any of those preferred places. Reviews help us stand out in the podcast world, and it's great to get your feedback, by the way, and what you think of the show. So please leave us a review on any of those places. For those of you that have subscribed, have been a part of the journey here, we thank you so much for that. But tell your friends, the Axe Band's back, baby. Syracuse Sports. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for watching today. And we will join you again on Syracuse Sports after the Orange take on Virginia Tech Thursday night. Have a good one, everybody.